Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar of DE&I Awareness Week, Expanding Your Markets with Accessibility. My name is James Swart, and I'm the Director of Education and Leadership Development for the National Apartment Association. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to share a few housekeeping points. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on the NAA website and YouTube channel. We've allotted a little bit of time at the end of today's sessions for questions and answers. Feel free to submit those anytime using the Q&A panel on the bottom of your screen or in the chat. We'd also like to take a moment to thank the Home Depot Pro for their sponsorship of this year's DE&I Awareness Week. We are thankful for their partnership with the National Apartment Association. And with that, I'm excited to welcome our speakers for today, Alicia Anderson, Regina Weinstein, Jill Ramsey, and Megan Blau. So Alicia, I will turn it over to you for introductions.
Thank you so much, James. And thank you to NAA for inviting me back again to share some time and space with you today. I'm so excited about our conversation. Happy DEI week. Thank you, NAA, for amplifying these important topics every single year during this month. And I also would like to add in, if I may, happy National Disability Employment Awareness Month too. October is also a month each year that we recognize in the United States the powerful contributions and talents of people with disabilities, that what they bring to organizations as employees and leaders and innovators and all of it. So this week is such an important week in multifamily to lift up diversity and equity and inclusion, and also today, accessibility, and all of the power that's packed behind those terms. Diversity is who we are. It's what makes each of us different. Equity is an unbiased access to opportunities, to resources, and to properties and homes. Inclusion is an action that we have to take every single day, really, to be successful in it. And accessibility, I always include in this mix because it's the magical key that opens the door to inclusion for all of us, whether it's in the workplace or in technology or in environments or infrastructure and in the places that we call home. It makes all of those things and so much more meaningful and usable for all abilities. And without accessibility in mind, it's just blatant exclusion for the 61 million Americans that are living with disabilities in our country. So for all of us to be here in front of you today is a special thing, to be delivering this message of inclusion at this event. So thank you so much for having us. I am a disability advocate. I speak, I train, I advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, honestly, around the world today. I'm speaking at organizations like Hyatt and Blue Shield and AAA, and I just literally got off the stage of Victoria's Secret, which is so crazy and so awesome. And to look back from where I came to where I am now, it's sometimes unbelievable. And it all started in multifamily for me. My career growing into who I am today began in our industry. And so to have the opportunity today to speak to my people, our people, my colleagues, my peers, my clients, and to create some moments of impact on this stage today is very, very important to me. It's personal. So, and I think that's because we all talk the same language and we understand some of the things that are working really well and maybe some of the things that we need to work on a little bit more. So as a disabled employee, I was on the vendor side of the business, and through ups and downs, ins and outs of some of the trials and tribulations that I ran into in my career, it's given me my voice to start to speak to other companies about the value of disability inclusion. And in multifamily specifically, as a disabled woman, I'm a wheelchair user for those of you that don't know who I am. And I've lived my entire life from a wheelchair. And there's been times in multifamily on the vendor side of the business where I've been in and out of properties, fully invited in every way. But there was also times where I had meetings in the grass and asked to leave simply for being me because of the fear factor around ADA and just some of the challenges that we have around that conversation. And so today, we are bringing something different to this conversation. We are bringing a human narrative to it. We want to create places where your teams, your employees, your vendor partners, your customers, your residents who have disabilities and without will find a safe place of belonging to really be who they are. And in that experience for me, I've grown into my career. So I'm so grateful. And we're going to dive into barrier-free and accessibility and all of the value that brings into organizations. And so today, all of us are going to seize this opportunity to create avenues of allyship. We want you to take something from this message and implement it. Implement it in your properties, implement it in your careers, implement it. Take little nuggets home and share them around the dinner table so we can start to expand the lens in which we're seeing and include disability in the diversity, inclusion, and equity conversation. So before we jump in, I want to introduce our panel, and then we'll kind of start jumping into all this goodness. So first of all, we've got Jill Ramsey. She's the Senior Construction Manager at Greystar. She's got 15 years of experience in finance, project management, and rental housing. She's also served as a project manager for the University of California, Davis, and has operations and asset manager for Blue Mountain Enterprises. Jill earned her project management professional certificate and real estate broker / sales agent license. She is a Six Sigma certification and master's certification in Microsoft Office. She holds a BA in help me with that one. Interdisciplinary. Thank you.
You got it.
From Humboldt State, Regina. Oh, she's alma mater. Jill, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited.
Thanks so much for.
Yeah. Our next guest is Regina Weinstein. She's a regional sales manager at Trip Hazard. She has 15 years of experience in rental housing industry. She's held training, managerial roles, problem solving positions, in sales for onsite.com, RealPage. She holds a bachelor's in communications from Humboldt State University. So you two went to school together. I don't know if it's the same time, but that's pretty awesome. Our final panelist is Megan Blau. She is making her debut in multifamily today. So welcome, Megan. She is the founder of Blue Copper Design, which is a full service interior design studio based in Arizona. She designs for the ethos of the New American West. She's an expert in barrier-free design, and she combines that with accessibility with absolutely beautiful interiors to elevate and empower her clients. Her designs are brave, they're intentional, they're inclusive, they're thoughtful, and they take every ability in mind. So I'm so excited for you to be here, Megan, and share your talents as well. Before we jump in, I just want to give kind of a quick overview of what we're talking about. Multifamily knows of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That is a fact. Like, we are all embedded in this conversation. You really have to be if you're working in our industry. Policies are in place. We understand the social and legal responsibilities to uphold it. However, it's oftentimes a check off the box formula that leads to think of accessibility as a problem, a delay, a financial obligation. And today, this conversation is going to be something a little bit better. It's going to be a conversation about accessibility driving innovation. Plato once said, necessity is the mother of invention. And so by shifting perspectives of the old tired debate and moving into a new lens to see accessibility for what it is, a path to innovation, a return on investment, and a chance to provide universal spaces for everyone. So today we want to explore tactics. How do we move beyond compliance in that mindset and physically to do it? We want to explore the social responsibility of disability inclusion and accessibility in multifamily. And we want to talk about budgeting and mitigating liability and progress over perfection. So are we ready to jump in, ladies? All right, let's do it. Okay, so I like to start with, if you don't mind, just real quickly, why? Why are you all here? What is your why to care about this subject? Whether it's a personal thing or it's within your business, why did you say yes to spending some time with me today?
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, thank you, Alicia, for the intro, and thank you to NAA for having me today. I'm really looking forward to talking about this subject, and it goes into my why a little bit. So I personally am a wheelchair user. So I've been using a wheelchair for over 14 years now. So I personally have investment into access and accessibility, and built my interior design business off of that principle. And my why for combining accessibility with like traditional interior design practices is simply to create a more accessible and inclusive world, and also add some beauty to that. So that's why I'm here today, to share my knowledge on my end, and hopefully move that ball forward.
I love it. And you definitely are adding beauty to it. That is a fact. Jill, how about
As a senior construction manager at Greystar here in Northern California, in my role, I'm at the forefront of these conversations with clients, and I'm face first when we're designing projects. It's just such an integral part of my role in starting the conversation. And so really, making these crucial conversations happen with our clients and our asset managers during planning and design phase. And just often it just takes one suggestion to make a difference. And so that's my why. That's why I'm here today. So thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to work with you. Thank you for being here. And Regina, what is your why?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's two strong whys for me. One is you're my twin sister and we have grown up in an inclusive environment. We know nothing but, kind of like sharing that road together, and our DNA is made up of that. So I love you, and I have watched inclusion work in throughout our lifetime, and it's been something that's been very powerful for us as a team. Now that I am working on the construction side professionally, oh, there's so much room for me to jump in and really be an active part of helping drive change in thought process. And so my goal every single day is to be that advocate who's out there looking for solutions that are universal for everyone, to think about where the thought process started, which was as little girls, whether it was you sitting on the traditional bus and me trying to help you get on the traditional bus, or vice versa, me sitting on the disabled bus and not having a seatbelt. That's how we grew up, was figuring it out. And so it's an honor for me to have the privilege to do that for my company that I love, and my team that I love, and my clients that I love, who have been so dedicated to me over the years. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for giving just a couple minutes to add in that richness. I really think it's important to discuss like the human experience and the like what drives you to care about this, and my platform is called Heart of Inclusion, and I really think we need to start with the human piece of it. And then when we have that kind of emotional attachment, whatever that means for us in our lives, doing the work, because there's so much work that you have to do to be successful, it's just much easier to navigate. So thank you all for sharing that. I think we need to start with ADA. Like, let's kind of tackle that. We're all very familiar with ADA, so I don't need to give a ton of background. ADA is one of the most significant pieces of civil rights legislation that's ever been passed in our country. It's right up there with the passing of civil rights, women's suffrage, and it literally has given people with disabilities the legal ability to access buildings. And it is so important for not only people with disabilities, but for all of us, because it gives us the freedoms to go to work and access buildings and have a home and all of those things. And the story behind it, the advocacy behind it is so powerful. And we in our industry have an opportunity to lift it up and advance it and use it as a strategic tool to pave paths forward and create environments that are even more inclusive, to have an active role in inclusion, doing the work, literally paving buildings, you know. And so what does ADA mean to you in your roles in multifamily? Jill, can I start with you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I want to touch on what you said about it, ADA being the largest piece of legislation since the civil rights movement. I don't think that is resonating as much in our industry as it should be. I think that's a really important piece. It's a legal set of guidelines and legal standards, and it influences every single project that I'm doing. So I'm on the third party management side at Greystar. And so we're doing improvement projects, right? We're not doing development, we're improving already existing spaces. So as you're looking at those spaces with ADA in mind, you have to take it past just the compliance piece of it, right? We're trying to create inclusive and high quality living communities for every single one of our residents. And I think there's a huge difference between compliance with ADA as the bare minimum, and then truly considering what inclusive spaces look like. So for me, ADA in my mind is the bare minimum. And what can we do beyond that?
Music to my ears. I see Megan shaking her head and agreeing too. We're like, yes, we're getting there. Oh my God. Yes, I agree with all of that. That's amazing. How about you, Regina?
I definitely agree with what Jill just said, but I think in my mind, probably just because of my history, I also see ADA as it's like an access point for all. Like we have to start thinking differently about the people around us. We have to start looking and like putting ourselves in someone else's perspective, their wheels, their shoes, and determine how we try to support our population that, quite frankly, disability touches everyone. So for me, it like I think of access as being one of the first thoughts that pop into my head, but it's also for me, it's also it can be somewhat of a challenge when it comes to trying to implement processes and make decisions professionally because of the fact that we are fairly far behind. So I kind of see it both ways, but yeah, my first thought is access.
Yeah, I love that. How about you, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with both of you and Regina and Jill. For me, the ADA is the bare minimum. It is something to build upon and improve upon. And a little bit about my background. So my business mostly focuses on residential interior design, which doesn't have legal requirements or guidelines when it comes to single family homes. But moving into multifamily, that's definitely a consideration. But I think that there are some like tidbits to take from the customization that you can get from a single family home and applying that into multifamily. So for me and my practices, I mostly use the ADA as reference points or guidelines. And then we have done a few small commercial projects where we implement that. But it really is just the bare minimum. It is, like I said, something to be approved upon. And I think like it's well overdue. Now's the time to start making those adjustments.
And I think that that's like a really important note. Like all three of you kind of touched on it. ADA is the bare minimum, and that's how we need to look at it to find the competitive advantage in looking at disability inclusion and accessibility as an opportunity in businesses. And businesses globally are starting to do that, like all kinds of businesses. It doesn't matter, like multifamily, technology, travel. And we're finding that if you start to bake accessibility into your business and every layer of the company, not just infrastructure, but technology, hiring practices, you name it, and have education in different areas of your business, ongoing education, there's a competitive advantage to have this type of new lens. Accessibility drives innovation. There's a return on investment. And we're seeing this in so many tools and resources that we're all using today. And so I guess that leads into my next question. I'll start with Regina. Have you noticed any competitive advantage within your organization at trip hazard and multifamily, the impacts of having a real dedicated lens to accessibility, the return on investment. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Definitely. I'm really proud to say that our company is recognized as a company who is educated and knowledgeable on the subject of ADA compliance, and really putting 2 feet forward of always following those guidelines at minimum or beyond. I'm really proud of that. Those conversations come up often for me in my day to day, and there's a lot of advantage to that. But if we can also add the word disadvantage, how can that also disadvantage my day to day professionally? Not every organization, and there's so many companies out there operating under that same view. So implementing a process or a procedure or a project that follows a guideline to get your partner, your customer to the end result of what they're looking for, and being that person who's making those recommendations and advising, if we are not doing our job of educating our clients as to what to look for when they're sourcing, say, potential additional vendors, or there's a spot check on a project, comparing job scope, and a competitive person comes in and is not looking through the ADA lens or the compliance lens, or what are the needs that we need to meet, there's a disadvantage for us, because right, there's a different price point to doing it the correct way or doing it the incorrect way. And so it's my job as, a partner to my customers to get out there and do my best to educate them on what we need to do, how we need to do it, and have thoughtful questions in mind as to what they should potentially challenge their other partners with when they're looking at a similar scope. So,
And I think that that's a really important note, is the education piece in this, because depending on where each organization is, you're right, like they might not care about accessibility as much as Trip Hazard might, or Greystar might, or so on. And if they don't understand that it's not only this check off the box, we need to do this, but there's actually this advantage of doing business that way, you're right, they're going to try to slip through the cracks and check off the box and move on and done. So I think ongoing education in this conversation is super, super important. Jill or Megan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. I actually have a real life example of what Regina is mentioning here. I've got a project in the Bay Area here in Northern California, where we're doing an entire club renovation, as well as a pool area renovation. We're expanding the existing footprint. So it's calling in all the California building code to get permits. ADA is a big part of the project. However, we've taken it a step further. For example, we're putting in a really large ramp for access up to our elevated deck to our clubhouse. And it's not just a straight ramp. This is a full ramp with the proper slope. It cuts back. It's very wide. We're widening doorways. We're putting in a lift for access to the pool, to the spa. Just some of these small things have actually increased. I mean, obviously doing a clubhouse renovation is going to increase your take rate on leasing, but it overall is kind of utilized across the board. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But some of these improvements already paid for themselves, just in the take rate on leasing. And so I think it's really important to be mindful of the designers that we're using, specifically a designer like Megan, who understands how you take it beyond that compliance, and then being mindful of the vendors that you're using that aren't going to just recommend to cut those corners and save those costs so they can get the project awarded. I think that's really important considerations for us in our industry.
I love that. And Megan, I know that I would love for you to jump in if you want to, because I know that you have lots of conversations with contractors and doing this type of work. And maybe you could share a little bit of like your success with getting in front of the design in front of the project, so it's not this thing that you're having to catch up on, and it seems like a financial obligation, but there's actually some real value to looking at the project from the beginning.
Yeah, of course. This is why I say that I'm an interior designer and I run my business as a traditional design firm, because I like to be involved in the project as soon as possible, which most designers actually do, regardless of what they say. But most of them want to be like in from the very beginning, because we can catch these like costly design mistakes that if you've already planned for something and then you have your designer come in later and pick out all the finishes, they might have a different idea as far as space planning or inclusion or features to be added. So yes, absolutely, like getting in front and thinking of the space as more of like a holistic view, because I think in construction now, all too often everything is so segmented. You have your architect, you have your contractors, you have all of your subs, and then your designer, and everyone has their hats that they need to wear. But somebody ultimately needs to have that full vision of like, this is what we're going for, this is at the end of the day, and then we'll specify it later. And in the residential world, that person is a designer. And so being able to get in front of, like I said, all of those decisions beforehand, it really can add like a very seamless end result, while thinking of an entire design plan and making sure that like our accessibility features aren't sticking out too much. Like, oh shoot, where are we going to put the ramp up to the clubhouse? Or like, we didn't space plan enough for a lift for both the spa and the pool, but like doing that in front is just, it's crucial, honestly.
And you had mentioned to me before on my podcast that you were on, which is amazing, about if you're planning to do these things ahead of time, you're actually typically a lot of times using less material and less pieces. Like, you're saving dollars if you're really looking at the bigger picture. And what all of this is I don't know if anyone on the call has ever heard of the curb cut effect, but it's this theory that when you're building disability friendly features or properties or products or whatever, that have accessibility baked in, they are appreciated by the larger population that you are designing for. So for example, people, closed caption, we all use, I mean, a lot of us use closed caption. That was developed for people who have hearing loss. 85% of the people that use closed caption don't have hearing loss. They don't have any type of disability. So when you're looking at these things as innovative opportunities to have your residents, your employees access your properties, it actually opens up space and return on investment universally, because we all choose that path of least resistance. So I think it's fascinating to kind of look through that lens of opportunity. Can anyone on the panel think of things in multifamily or real estate that have been kind of innovative design?
Yeah, I have a real life experience, kind of like what you were saying, Alicia, of what I've talked about with you before, about how people think, one, accessibility is expensive, especially in the residential market, and it's not. What's expensive is renovations and retrofitting and making a space work, which Jill, you mentioned that that's the majority of what you do, and I'm sure you deal with that every day. Like, sometimes it's easier to build from the ground up and less expensive than it is to go back and renovate for anything, whether it's accessibility or just it needs a renovation. So I do barrier-free consulting work too for people who are just needing questions answered on accessibility without a full design plan. And I had a client and she was doing a brand new build with a big builder, like a tract home builder. And we went into the office when she was there to make her selections, and I gave some suggestions on to how to make her home work for her son. So her son had a disability. We built an ensuite, and really we were focused on the bathroom and making that accessible with a roll-in shower and just enough space for him to be able to safely use his bathroom. And long story short, we ended up saving her, I think it was like $10,000 or $15,000 off the total price of her home, because to build it from the ground up with accessibility features baked in actually ended up costing that much less, because we used less materials of drywall and electrical and concrete and everything that could be used. And she was shocked. I was shocked, to be honest. The salesman was shocked too. He's like, "Oh my gosh." And I'm like, it was a very real life, tangible dollars and cents example of what I've been saying, as far as accessibility is not expensive, but renovations can be, and they can be for everyone. So yeah, I mean, and kind of going back to your curb cut effect too, roll-in showers are my #1 request to add for people, because I think it's having an accessible bathroom where people can safely take care of themselves and their hygiene is the most difficult obstacle for people with disabilities to face, but also one of the most, I feel like, easy things to give in a home. So having an accessible bathroom with a roll-in shower doesn't only help people with disabilities, but it goes into that curb cut theory, like you're saying, like it benefits everyone.
Well, and that type of design we're all starting to want, and especially the aging population, there's so many crossovers in the market that it would benefit for resale and all of or releasing. And I know, Regina, you have one more story that's kind of similar that I would love for you to share too, about the benefits of kind of thinking forward in the project design.
Yeah, so Lucia and I were brainstorming just ideas of stories for this segment, and I just was working with a client who had an accommodation request come from a resident, and so this is actually talking about rehab, right? Not a brand new build, but we're trying to make an accommodation change. And so we meet at the property, we walk the location, and it was an entry access point to this gentleman's apartment. And there's about a 4-inch, it's not a full step, but a 4-inch step to get in, and he's in a wheelchair. So came out, we scoped initially an ADA ramp, compliant with the railing and curbing and, meeting slope. Well, this was a fairly large project with the direction we had to swing it and all the components that fell into play. So it had a hefty price tag on it. So I sent the estimate over to the client. We mulled over it a little bit. We decided to meet back at the property. And my VP of operations, Carlo Maravilla, who's an amazing person, he and I really dug deep. How can we do this differently so that it is more cost effective and potentially more useful? So instead of taking out the concrete in front of the single unit, we looked at the units that were also adjacent and in the same area. And what we determined through a little bit of an investigation is that if we took out a much larger section, we could not only repair the gentleman who was living in the apartment that had the accommodation, but also his neighbor that was right next door, who also is a senior and had his, mobile scooter out front. And the price, because we had enough room to slope the concrete to meet in the middle and then tee the walkway back to the main path of travel, not only was it financially less expensive, but the slope meets requirement where railing and curbing and the additional tools associated to an ADA ramp were no longer a factor. And ongoing, whether or not someone with a disability or not lives in those two apartments, the next person, if they are able-bodied or if they are a wheelchair user, have the same access. It's universal. Those two apartments will be universal ongoing. So we were really excited about it. The approval came in, the price was less, and everyone's happy. And it was just a really good example of just thinking outside the box. What else can we do if we don't accept what we think is the answer and we continue to explore it and push it? And honestly, the world opened up and there's quite a few happy people now. So, and we learned from it, which was great.
Yeah, and I just love both of these stories because the point is to start to think outside of the check off the box, ADA, we've got the ramp or whatever it is, and move on. what is the bigger picture, the bigger use case for years and years and years and years and years to come. And so I think both of those examples are super powerful in thinking beyond compliance. How do we remove barriers? And I guess that leads into the social responsibility of multifamily when it comes to disability inclusion and accessibility initiatives, because disability is 1 in 4 of us. It's actually our common ground. It's not the thing that separates us. And 80% of people with disabilities, again, like they are non-apparent. You're not even going to realize that they have a disability until they start to raise their hand and ask for things. And so it's a huge customer base. It's a huge market to really start to think, oh, if we make this more universally a universal use, how many more apartments are we going to lease? How many more customers are we going to have? How many more residents are going to live at our properties and not move? And so there's just so much value in kind of starting to be creative with the process. So can we talk about barrier free a little bit, like dive into what that means from like a universal perspective? I think maybe we'll start with Megan and then pop over to Jill. But Megan, do you want to share a little bit about the theory of barrier free design?
Yeah, of course. So there's a lot of different terms for accessibility. Obviously, we've been talking about ADA. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with universal design. There's aging in place, but I feel like barrier free is one that kind of gets overlooked. And that's what I practice in my business because it has actually looser guidelines. And by that, like almost no legal guidelines. Like I said, I work in residential, but what that means for me is I get to really listen to my clients and customize their space. So barrier free to me is as simply as it sounds, removing barriers. And that can obviously mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And it might not be the same from one person's residential home who's living with a disability to another. So that's more what I delve with, but I use practices from the ADA and universal design practices and guidelines to be able to shape and get recommendations and ideas for barrier-free design practices. So for a multifamily application, barrier-free might be something that you could add on later at like your client's request or your occupant's request. But you definitely want to start obviously with the ADA guidelines, but I would even build upon that into universal. So all of the terms kind of have their different meanings. Universal design has the meaning of being the most inclusive to the most amount of people. And you can obviously think like, what does that mean? That sounds like a lot, and it can be, but it's more of taking a holistic approach again to the design, to the construction plan, and seeing like, okay, maybe that means ADA guidelines, but maybe it doesn't. Like maybe we need to do a couple extra steps so that we're still within ADA compliance, but if we add this one grab bar here, or maybe we lower a soap dispenser, or maybe we have different cabinet options, we can include more people that goes beyond the ADA. So I think the terms for accessibility are something that are being talked about a little bit more now, but I think we definitely need to expand on it because I see all the time, which I'm sure everyone here does too, of like them being interchangeable, and they're kind of not. Like they all do have their separate meanings.
I love that. And I know like with a lot of my clients in multifamily, I'm not doing barrier-free consulting, but I am having a lot of DEI and diversity conversations. And my clients are starting to say, we have ADA, compliance is absolutely important. It needs to be there. But how do we go beyond? Is it usable? How do we make it better? What knobs do we need to be using? Is the carpet too thick? What's the terrain like? And I think looking at an overall perspective of ADA good, now how can we enhance it to make it even more usable? Jill, do you have any thoughts there?
I do. Barrier free to me is just removing unnecessary obstructions and challenges. It's removing things that are unnecessary for some people, right? Any of us that work in this industry, being client focused and creating these communities for people to live in, anybody in this industry would agree that, yeah, if there's an obstruction or a challenge for somebody, let's remove that barrier for them, right? So I think what comes from that is universal design, which, Megan was talking about. And, it could be as simple as a parent who has a small child who doesn't have, who has trouble getting up steps. I mean, it's that simple. A parent using a ramp instead of having to navigate those steps with their small child, or pushing their stroller. I mean, we're having the same conversations for everybody out there. So that's, to me, barrier free is just removing these unnecessary obstacles.
I love that. Let's remove them. Get them out of here. I
Oh.
love that. Give me that, Laurel. Yes. Regina, do you have any goodness to add?
I mean, my feedback was similar. Barrier free in my world, things that I think of are, why is there a threshold that has a bump, a step up, just things that can be adjusted or modified so that there is no obstruction to somebody who wants to have access. When I started this job, we obviously focus a lot on trip hazards, and my boss came to me and he said, just think about your sister when she's,
No.
rolling down a sidewalk. Ride your bike. Do you feel a bump when you're on your bike? And you think about that. If you think about it that way, you really notice where the improvements can happen. And so, barrier free for me is eliminating those bumps. And how do we do it? Tackling it one by one.
Oh, shout out to Phil. I love that. That was
It was
beautiful.
actually Eric, but
Oh, Eric,
shout
sorry.
out to him as well.
I love all of that.
Yeah.
So, I'm going out of order a little bit because, Jill, I know you do a lot of DEI work and inclusion work at Greystar and in the industry. Can we give some little nugget? Like, how do we do better? Like, what do we need to do? Where do we go? What is some little like nugget tidbits that we could give away to our audience today that they can start to like think about in their organizations, how to maybe open up this conversation a little bit more? Do you have any nuggets?
Absolutely. I mean, if you take away one thing today, it's have the conversation. Have the conversation, whether you're a maintenance tech, whether you are a community manager, you're in front of a client in a construction role, anybody, have the conversation. It starts with us at the property level. And just bringing up the possibilities for inclusion and access, and this barrier free. Have those conversations with people. Talk about it in your team huddles. Talk about it with your regional managers. Talk about what you're hearing from residents. And the more we talk about it, the more change we will see from there. So I think it's important to say it out and raise your hand and start doing that.
So that just gave me the chills. Say it, raise your hand and say it out loud. And that's exactly what we need to be doing in this conversation of disability inclusion, is discussing a topic that we traditionally have been very afraid of because we're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. And it's kept us in this very stagnant place, whether it's on infrastructure or even hiring people to be your employees. And so I think having the conversation so we get more comfortable with something that can be uncomfortable, but it becomes more comfortable as we learn from backgrounds that we're unfamiliar with today. So I love that. How about you, Megan?
I'll just say one more thing. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, please.
I think it's empowering to have that conversation for ourselves. Like, sitting here on this panel is empowering to me to think for myself that I have this opportunity to make a difference. So, hang on to that power and use it. Use it in your roles. You can definitely influence.
I love
Sorry,
that.
yes.
Sit in your power.
No,
How about you?
Yeah, to add on to what you're saying, Jill, I would say that for every person who does raise their hand and say, hey, I need, this, that, or the other from my space, there's 1, 2, maybe 5, 10 people who are not raising their hand. So thinking of this, I think that also makes it feel like it's a smaller problem than it is. But because, people don't know how to address this, people with disabilities don't even know how to address this. I mean, not everyone is born with a disability. Some people incur it over their life. It's also important to note here that anybody can have a disability at any time. It's not just something that is a set stagnant group of people. And so removing that awkwardness from the conversation as much as you can on your business side and being like, I'm with you, I'm here to help like find the solution, can give a lot of peace to people on the other end of that conversation who are needing these requirements and they don't know where to start, or they don't want to be a bother, or there's so many like emotional parts of disability that is very overlooked and really plays a big role. And only if that really makes it so that not everybody who needs services get them because they don't know how to ask for it. So if you have, like I said, if you have people in your community or in your buildings that are talking about it, there's a group of people that are not.
I love that too. And I think it's also important to know that like people with disabilities, they're on different spectrums of accepting. And sometimes you don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing or there's stigma around it, or you feel like you're not going to get the apartment or you're not going to get the job or you're not going to get the raise. And so, yeah, I love that point to really amplify the voices that are willing to raise their hand to create space. That's really good.
Yeah. And to add one more thing to that too, like just because someone has a disability doesn't make them an expert in DEI and, inclusion and awareness. Like I would be an interior designer whether I had a disability or not, and I know that in my heart and in my soul, and I have this opportunity now to apply this perspective and make design something more than it has been before. But I think all too often people with the disability are looked at for the answer, and it's like, I'm not a construction expert. Like, just because I started using a wheelchair 3 years ago. What does that make for me? Like I worked in marketing before. I can tell you about marketing. So it can be an exhausting feat for those with disabilities. And so doing as much as you can on your business side to be able to break down those barriers and really be a partner with your occupants, I think it is huge.
Yeah, and it requires a partnership. It requires collaboration. It requires communication. It requires listening to somebody and then also asking questions, the tough ones. And a disabled person can't do it on their own, and probably a company can't either. You really need to learn from each other and collaborate to find a happy medium a lot of times. So do you have anything to add there, Raj?
I just think this is just a conversation of humanity and being a human and thinking about other people. And just, I know I said this earlier, but really trying to put yourself in someone else's position and not just letting the day go by without considering that. And if you lead with love, it comes right back to you. So I just think a lot of this is just all about the human experience, and we're just learning how to navigate that, together. And I think when we start really like thinking about other people and just slowing down for a second and just stopping and trying to shift the way that we've been traditionally doing things, we have growth. So
I love that. And then I guess, where do we go from here? All of this takes budgeting and mitigating liability, and how do we advance these conversations and initiatives? Is there any other things that we missed from that standpoint that we could give some advice to our attendees today? Jill, do you want me to start with you?
Yeah, I'll start. Property budgeting is a big opportunity. I know it's budget season right now for most of us. This starts at the property level. As you're putting your projects together and you're thinking about what do I need to do the next year, start thinking about that through the lens of accessibility and inclusion, right? Start thinking about it through that lens. Put something in there for the future. It doesn't have to be next year, but like start thinking about what that looks like long term. This is where we can start. And having these kinds of forums that you guys are all joining today and talking about these opportunities out loud is where we can make a difference. And not just in your construction project budgets. I'm talking in your operational budgets, your staff budgets, etc.
Yes, all of it. I love it. Megan?
I've got a comment on this subject because this is definitely part of my everyday, and where I see success is through the plan. Lean on your partners, allow those that really focus on, these solutions to be that supporting partner to give you those recommendations. I know for us, like our goal is to get out and provide recommendations for our customers, 3-year plans. We want Jill to come into budgeting and know that we've been there and that we have a strong opinion on helping recommend financial structure for an overtime plan so that it's not this big, overwhelming, I'm never going to get there. You start chipping away at it and eventually you get there, and then you have this new behavior that really supports just a really much more streamlined budgeting process. So just plan.
I love that. Megan, any advice for me?
My advice is more on the tangible design side to figure out how you could work these elements into your budget. So first off would be access. I mean, making sure like you have 0 curbless entries into all of the doors, the back doors, the front doors. So like Regina, with your story that you told earlier, like making sure that maybe you can preemptively put those in before somebody asks for it. So that's always my biggest recommendation, because if you can't get in the home, then what's the home, doesn't really help whatever is in there. And that also would include into parking. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been to apartment complex parking lots and, parking lots in general where it looks all ADA, but it's definitely not up to ADA code. So that would be a huge thing I would look at too. And then once you can get into the home, I would say curbless showers and hard floors. I mean, those are like the #1 recommendations, like bare minimum, that I would implement into any accessible unit. And you can obviously build upon that from there. But those are always my recommendations.
I love it. I think those are all really useful and helpful. And then I'm going to add a few in too, if I may. There's a saying in disability inclusion advocacy, nothing for us without us. And I think that organizations need to start looking at hiring people with disabilities or consultants and put them in leadership roles, put them around your boardroom tables when you're making these kinds of key decisions, because accessibility on your website, hire somebody that's visually impaired, put people in places that are experts in this stuff to help you be as efficient as possible, or hire companies like Trip Hazard and companies that have like these planned out plans, like Megan. Other things that really help organizations and like encourage disability inclusion in employment and have remote flexible schedules, make accessibility an overall philosophy, go beyond compliance like we're talking about today, implement DEI and ERGs that include disability. 90% of companies are implementing DEI globally. Only 6% include disability in that conversation. So we have a big gap. That's why I'm so busy, honestly. And we need authentic representation. We need to be showing disability in marketing and within your cultures, within your companies. See people with disabilities working and living at your communities, and that's giving the overall perception that it's possible, that you care, and it makes your employees feel safe to start to disclose. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is progress over perfection. You're never going to be done. Disability, inclusion, accessibility is the technology, everything is moving so fast. You have to have it embedded. You have to have trainings. You have to keep checking up on it, and you pluck away, and then all of a sudden you're creating these beautiful environments in your organizations that are allowing so much more space for people of all abilities. So we're going to go into QA. I want to thank NAA so much for allowing us to have this conversation. Thank you for caring and for giving disability a voice. James, back to you. Ladies, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
agreed. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us today and sharing some great insights. So as Alicia said, we've reached the Q&A portion. So if you've got a question for anyone on the panel, feel free to drop that in the chat or the Q&A box.
We want a tough one. Anyone? A tough question.
Wow, go for tough at the beginning.
I'd like to see if we can get stumped. No questions? Can't see.
I'm not seeing any, so we will take that as a sign that you all covered everything that everyone was wondering about today.
Wow.
And what will likely happen is someone will think of a question as soon as we end. So certainly if you would like to get in touch with any of our speakers today, send me over an email and I'm happy to connect. But again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. This was a fantastic session after 2 other fantastic sessions that we've had this week. And for everyone on the line, come back again tomorrow. We've got another session focusing on affiliates and what can be done in that space around DE&I, and certainly closing out the week on Friday talking about storytelling and belonging. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today and have a fantastic Wednesday.